Hello and welcome to the Greenlight Guru True Quality Virtual Summit, the 3-day event designed to provide you actionable takeaways you can implement in your own company to innovate faster, stay ahead of regulatory change, and use quality as a strategic asset to grow your device business. This session is on medical device product pitfalls and how to avoid them. My name is Nick Tittman. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Greenlight Guru, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We've got a really special session scheduled for you today. I know our speaker, Peter Sebelius, is really looking forward to covering some of the most common mistakes made during medical device product development projects and how you can avoid them. So before we dive too deep into today's presentation and introduce our speaker and its company, Medical Device HQ, I'm going to touch on a few housekeeping items real quick. First, the session is going to run for about 45 minutes in total and will include a Q&A session at the end, where Peter has been kind enough to answer your questions. So I encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation as they come up in the box on the right-hand side, and we'll get to as many of them as time permits. And just as a note, this entire session will be recorded, and you can also download the slides directly while you're on this page right now. They'll also be sent out after the event. Once this session wraps, there's a 10-minute break before the next live session begins. If you're interested in learning why design validation is more than testing, how do we validate our validations, I encourage you to make sure you're registered for the following session and use your unique link to tune in. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on this free virtual summit. If you've been on one of our training sessions before, then you know we put these on because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru. Likely a similar mission as many of you at today's summit. Anything we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker with less risk aligns with that mission. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether that's through hosting free events and training sessions like this, partnering with world-class medical device consultants, or through our award-winning medical device QMS software platform. If you'd like to learn why medical device companies from across the globe are moving from paper-based general-purpose quality management systems and adopting our purpose-built medical device quality management software, I encourage you to head on over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation and schedule your free personalized demo. In doing so, you'll learn how the very best medical device companies are leveraging our purpose-built QMS software to gain ISO certification, market approval, breeze through audits, and push beyond just compliance to true quality. So, now, on to the bulk of today's presentation. Let me give a proper introduction to your presenter today, Peter Sebelius. Peter has over 20 years experience in the medical device industry as a senior manager, consultant, and entrepreneur. He is the founder of Medical Device HQ, a professional training provider offering both online and virtual courses in the medical device project management, risk management, design control, and quality management areas. He holds degrees in engineering and organization and management, and is a member of the joint working groups on ISO 13485 and ISO 14971. Peter, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us, and let me take it away.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's get started then. Once upon a time, I came across this slide or this statement. A carelessly planned project would take 3 times longer to complete than expected. A carefully planned project will only take twice as long. Now that's so depressing, isn't it? But I'm sure a few of you are smiling when you read it. And that's the thing, we recognize this. And quite a few of us have been in that situation where projects go totally overboard. And my presentation today is going to be bringing up some of the key things to think of and reflect on and do to avoid just that. And when I'm a bit cynical here now with these really depressing statements, it comes to my mind when my finance director, my previous finance director told me, Peter, if you find a project where if it takes twice the time, costs twice as much as you thought, and you will sell half as much as you plan to, go ahead, take that project and run for it. And that's also very cynical, but sometimes actually quite true. So before we get to the actions and advice, let's paint a background a little bit on projects so we agree on what we're talking about. So projects, the academic definition of that would be to say it's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Now that's really, like I said, slightly academic, but still it holds water. And any medical device product development project would meet this criteria and this definition. And many organizations have chosen to organize their development work as projects. And what is it then the project manager should do? Well, you know, it's basically this: get the product to market. That's usually the assignment that the project manager gets. And that's the most important thing to reach. And obviously, there's a ton of different things underlying this goal, such as regulatory compliance, getting the cost of goods sold right, getting there on time, and a ton of different things. One of the basic principles in project management is that there shall be a single point of responsibility. That is the project manager. So that's the person who gets the glory if everything is successful and gets the blame if everything fails. That's a simplified picture, of course, but roughly so. Make sure you have one single point of responsibility that ensures that the project reaches its goals. So what about the process of going through a project then? This is one of the last things to say about project in general. Usually projects start with some kind of initiation, and then there is a planning phase, and these are quite generic terms still. You go into a execution phase where you then create the deliverables, and you might even run some agile methodology or project management as part of that, such as Scrum, and that's perfectly fine if you have software or other deliverables that are appropriate to deliver incrementally. And then you close out your project and you enter the maintenance phase or the production phase, which hopefully is going to be many, many years from that day, and you're going to sell a lot of your medical devices. Now, if you were to tie design control elements into this process, what would that be like? Well, when we start the planning in project management terminology, we would say defining the scope. And what is that in the medical device world? Well, some of the terms that are coming up would be the intended use, it would be the user needs, it would be design inputs, for example. Those fits very neatly into the scope of the project. And when it comes to scheduling or assigning responsibilities, design planning is the word. If we continue in the planning phase, you can see here in my slide that I have how much is it going to cost, the budget. Now, that's not a regulatory requirement, and one of the few things that FDA and notified bodies wouldn't care much about. But we might, at the end of the planning phase, have a design review to check that our design inputs are adequate. That's could be appropriate or suitable. And when we continue into the execution phase, lots of design control elements, like we create design output, we do risk management, that's super important activity. We're going to be doing usability engineering, design transfer, creating the device master record, that horrible three-letter acronym, DMR, and design verification and design validation. Eventually, you're going to have the DHF, and maybe you can even get a CE mark or an FDA clearance or approval, or at least start that process. You then close out your project normally, and there might then be production or a clinical investigation, depending on your situation. And please note, change control or design changes is still there, you know, for quite some time. So design control even continues after you've released your product, which I guess makes perfect sense, but it's hard to remember sometimes. And I cannot believe how they could come up with those abbreviations, DMR, DHF, DHR. I bet there's a few more of you who get confused on those. But that's how it is. That's how life is. So to abbreviate this and put it together in a short project process, this is roughly what it could look like. We go through, we may have a pre-study or feasibility, concept study, then initiate, plan, execute, and there we have design, design verification, design transfer, design validation, close it out, run the clinical investigation, and hopefully we continue to produce the product. So why am I talking about design control all of a sudden when this is about medical device project fails or mistakes or pitfalls? Well, there is a huge overlap between design control and project management. There are so many things, and this is one of the reasons why I years ago started giving training courses on project management for medical device product development, because you could say that I saw the QSR requirements, the ISO 13485 requirements on design and development, and I saw the project management world, and I was thinking to myself, they're basically saying the same things, but how do they fit together? And they do fit together a lot. That's why I'm bringing up design control in this context. So now we painted a background on project management and the process. One of the questions that I get a lot during my training courses is, what's enough? What is enough? You know, people are just like, how much do I need to document? How far do I need to go? What's going to happen? That's a very, very common question. And we're going to be looking at this question from one point of view. You could say it's a little bit of a risk-based approach. And but before we get started on that, there are two different perspectives. One, what's enough for your own sake? And that's usually easier to answer. Like, what do you need to do to convince yourself of things being correct or maintaining enough records for the future so that you can run your business? That's one perspective. The second perspective is how much is enough from an auditor's point of view so that you are going to pass the audit or get the product approvals or clearances that you've been striving for throughout this whole project. Now, let's talk about that latter perspective then. So let's say that you have 6 requirements, A to F, and you say, okay, we're going to spend X number of units, or in this case, 3 units of work on each requirement or part. And then you look at it a little bit more and say, look, what about that? We have requirement A, super critical, requirement B, medium, and the rest are really low criticality. What should we do about that? It seems like a smart idea to focus on A and B, right? And this setup would be compliant, but it's not particularly risk-based. I mean, we're not focusing on the critical things. So let's try another approach. Let's go with all the resources on A and B. Is that good? Well, you're focusing on the right stuff, but you're also neglecting C, D, E, and F. And what would then an auditor say that is looking at your records from C, D, E, and F? They would say, so show me the records from E. And you say, have nothing. You didn't do anything? No, nothing. Well, that's not good, right? That's a given nonconformity, basically. So here you have a risk-based approach, you could say, but it's not compliant or conforming to the requirements. So what should you do? Well, I think that what you need to do is to try to get the right levels in the right places. And this plays very well alongside the risk-based approach, I would say. You have your supercritical requirement with most of the resources. Medium, you spend quite a lot on that. And then you do a little bit on C to F. Because if you have something, that's always better than nothing. Having a discussion on whether something is sufficient or not, it's much easier than just concluding that we have absolutely nothing. So that's one small piece of advice. Please note that I'm still using 18 points or 18 units of effort or work in this case. I'm not saying you should cut corners or anything like that, or use this as a way of significantly bringing down your efforts in the medical device product development, but you should focus them in the right places. That's really important. And that's, I think, is the ethically correct thing to do as well, to get a good product out there which meets the requirements and is safe to use and has good efficacy for the patients and users. So that's a little bit on that area. So this, I would say, risk-based and compliant. Always make sure you have one record at least on the requirement to make sure you can present something when that audit comes. So that's the first, a little backdrop together with the introduction to project management. What about documentation pitfalls then? This is one of the causes why we are having delays and issues in medical device projects. So the documentation pitfalls, let's bring up how it should be done in a medical device project. So normally the starting point for any engineers working with development would be to start off with the design input, the abstract technical requirements or system requirements, and they would, based on that, then design the product. They would do risk management, they would do usability engineering, they would do updates to the requirement traceability matrix, they would update the design plan, it's supposed to be maintained. And if you work with agile methods, or even if you don't, you might very well verify or do design verification as well in that process. And hopefully out comes really nice, good design outputs, components, material specs, component specs, whatever it might be. So source code as well, and eventually the medical device would also be nice design outputs. And on top of that, you might even learn things from the design that feeds back into your design inputs, and therefore you update them. In fact, when it comes to software development, it's even required to update the parent requirements as a result of progress. It's so common that it must be done. How is it then done in real life? Well, quite a few projects actually start with very vaguely defined design inputs. People start designing because there's not time to figure out what the requirements really are, and then you design some more, and out comes deliverables, and then somewhere along the road someone says, what about the documentation? Oh crap. I don't know if you're allowed to say that in this kind of presentation, by the way, but I blame the fact that I'm not a native English speaker, so I guess it's right. I hope so. And then you just reverse engineer everything that you should have been doing in the development project. Now, a few of you, I'm sure, have seen this, maybe even a majority of you listeners and viewers. Should we be doing it this way? No, not ideally. It's not good practice. It's a lot of cleaning to be done when you've ended up in this situation. So one question that I usually ask my course participants is, how do you complete the documentation in an average project? And I ask them, do you complete it according to A, or B, or C, or even the D option? And you'd be surprised how many people actually say D. Even in large companies, it seems like we finish the documentation way too late. Now, I would say B is a good approach. You could argue, yeah, but we have more records at the end. Sure, that's true, and you would go closer to C. But still, people are waiting way too long to get started on the documentation. And this is one of the places where good document management systems really helps, because it facilitates that creation and review and approval of documents. So that's a good thing. And I appreciate what Nick and John are doing in that field in the medical device industry. So the trick is to get to B, or even possibly A, and front load your project with the documentation to get it going in a really good way. That's one good piece of advice, if you ask me. Another thought-provoking thing that I present and ask my course participants sometimes is this: what's wrong with this document? And people look at it, and I can say there's no formal mistake, really, but there is a lot of people signing it, isn't there? So I count, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 signatures. Do we need 6 signatures? I know that all those digital signature companies, DocuSign and others, they're making a big fuss about the cost of having one person sign a paper document. It's cheaper if you have an electronic signing, but there's still a cost to it. And what happens when people see that there are that many people who are going to be signing it? Well, I think that Carolina there in the middle, or Roger Moore, he will be looking at it and say, oh, there are so many others that have already signed it, so I'll just sign it. To be honest, I've seen this kind of documents with this amount of signatures where when I turned the page, I realized that the printer had stopped working on page 2. So it was just half the page and then just blank papers. And still there were this many signatures on the front page. Now that's a total failure on document control. So my advice here, and there are many misconceptions in this field, is that don't make it unnecessarily difficult for yourself, because remember that you as a manufacturer, you decide, not from time to time, but in your procedures, who should be reviewing and approving documents. So why making it so difficult? And I argue, I don't have the science to back it up, but I argue, and feel free to share that in the question or write to Nick, who's taking care of that, if you agree with me, that the value of adding signatures goes down drastically. And personally, I'd rather have 1 or 2 people who really pay attention to the document sign it than 8 people who doesn't read it. Let me know if you agree with that or not. So that's one of the problems, that we simply make it unnecessarily difficult for us to get papers and documents through, and we pay with unreasonable amounts of time to market because we're busy chasing papers or signatures if we don't have a paper-based system. Now, talking about documentation pitfalls, there's 1 or 2 more things I would like to bring up, and that is a widespread misconception, I would say, relating to review. Many people, particularly in larger companies, tell me about the issues they have with review. So to me, review is to provide feedback on a document, send it back to the reviewer, or sorry, the issuer of the document, who most of the time would implement most of those suggestions, but there might be a few where the issuer feels like, okay, I can see your point, but I don't agree. I think we should have this document approved. And then sometimes the reviewer refuses to sign, which effectively puts a stop to the document, and you exert like some kind of blackmailing here to say, well, if you don't change that, I won't sign, and you stop the whole project. So it's important to say review is not the same thing as approval. What I think you should be doing is to take those comments that have not been implemented, forward them to the approver and say, look, I as an issuer and the reviewer, we could not agree on these two things. We leave it to you to decide. The approver might then say, yeah, I can live with that, or no, you have to fix it. And that's okay. We just cannot have 3, 4, 5, 6 reviewers who all think that, oh, you need to do a bit more. Oh, no, it should be different. And I have a hard time saying exactly what it should be, but it should be different. And even worse, sometimes you send the document to review, you get it back, update, send it for review again, and then people add more comments. This could take forever. There is such a thing as good enough. And I oftentimes ask questions when we work with documents like this, is this going to change the product? Is it going to have an impact on what we actually do? And most of the time it's just, no, this is just a documentation question. So why are we spending time on it? Well, we don't want to upset a notified body auditor. And then I say, well, can we tell for sure what they will think about it? No, not really. Okay, so we might as well roll a dice then. Yeah, and stop wasting time and money. That's my way of seeing it. Let me know if you agree in the comments. I'm looking forward to your questions later on relating to this. So, review is to examine the documents and give feedback. The decision to approve or not is the approver's decision. That's important to remember. Not all procedures are set up this way, but you may consider it and see, could you save time, money, get to market faster? And here's another perspective, get to market fast. I say it's unethical to not get to market fast. How can I say that? Because I think most of our new product development projects we run is about supplying a better product, something that is better for the patient or possibly cheaper. And you say, but how can that be ethical? Well, then we're saving money for the public, at least where we have a public health sector. And that's also good because we could use more resources on the people who needs it. So it's our ethical, moral obligation to get to market as fast as possible, of course, assuming we don't cut corners. But the waste is just immoral. When we do non-productive things, that is to deprive patients the ability to get the latest and best medical devices. And that's not fair. That's not right. Yeah, that's my take on that one. So why do medical device projects get late? Well, one more reason why this is the case is, and this goes back many years. When I started out being a project manager, I found myself running to the printer. And you might say, why is that? Why did I run to the printer? Well, I knew that I wanted to have a fairly aggressive plan that my team members would think is just like, yeah, I can do that, but it's hard. We need to fight a bit. It's a little bit challenging. Yeah? But I knew that there was a low likelihood to succeed with that plan. So I also wanted a more conservative plan so that I could tell the steering group that I dare to almost promise you that I will deliver to you on this date. And then I realized that there might be some conflicts if the one group, my team members, saw that I was using one plan and schedule with them and another with the steering group. And that's why I was running, because when I was printing the team plan, I pressed Control P and ran off to the printer room, got the papers before anyone could see them. And the same was true for my steering group meetings. I had to close the blinds to the conference room in case a team member would walk by and see, he has another milestone or date for that project. Then I presented to them. And I realized this is not fair. And I didn't want to trick the two groups. And the reason why I had to do this was that we talked about the future as if there was only one outcome. And let me tell you more about that. So we had the project process before, initiation, planning, and then we go on to the execution phase. And this is where it gets tricky. If someone asks you, when will the project finish? Yeah, well, what do you say? Will you give them a date just out of the blue? Well, you might have done your planning, but is it the aggressive date, or is it what you expect, or is it what you dare to promise? Those dates are not the same, because we have to understand that if we talk about an aggressive goal, there might be 20, 30% chance of actually beating that goal. But the expectation, what you really expect, that's like by definition, the 50% chance of success. That's something else. And if it's a promise you're making that like your life depends on it, it's going to be significantly more time. But most of the time, we just, boop, there's a date coming out, and we don't consider whether that's the goal or the expectation, or is it's the commitment date, and they're all very different. So just adding that dimension to the communication makes life a lot more easy, and you will have fewer lies when you talk about completion date. So if anyone asks you, and you're in a project management role, says, when are you going to finish? And you say, well, do you want to know the date where I can really promise it to you, or do you want the aggressive date? And they say, I want the aggressive date. I'd rather not say, because there is a quite high chance of failure or risk of failure, but I promise you that I will chase my team members as hard as I can to make them perform above everyone's expectation. Is it okay with you if I tell you about the commitment date, and you trust me that I'm doing my utmost to get this project where it should be? And most of the times people say yes. And then you give them the commitment date, and they rest assured that you're doing everything you can to keep the efficiency up in the project. Try that the next time you have that communication. What's like the likelihood you want me to work with when I give you a date, and see what happens. Might work, might not. So another question, how much reserve time is included in the project schedule? And this goes now into project risk management, a super critical part of managing a project. Now, I don't know how about you, what your experience is. And once again, I would be happy if you shared this with Nick, who's taking care of the comments here. But typical reserve times, I've seen many project managers add 10, 20, 30% to the schedule. And then the next question is, how much time does it take to solve one design issue? Let's say we have a medical device with an injection molded part in it, and we find out quite late that something's wrong, something's not working. So we spend maybe 2 weeks to understand the problem. We are going to design a solution. That takes another week. We test it in a prototype, and that can take some time to get the manufacturing of the prototype. So we spend another 2 weeks. We update the tool. That could take 6 weeks. You produce new products, 2 weeks. You test again, 1 week. And then you validate the process, and you have 3 weeks. Grand total, 17 weeks. That's 4 months and a little bit more. So if you have a schedule which says 12 months and you added 10%, you've already lost 3 months with one issue. How many issues do you typically encounter in a project? I would say 2, 3, 4 major disasters. Well, now you can start doing the math. If that's the case and they happen, well, some of them would be in parallel, but you could easily add 12, 18 months of reserve time. Or you work very actively with project risk management, not product, but project risk management, to make sure you never ever end up in that situation where it fails at a late stage. And these two areas are both neglected. We do too little project risk management, and we allocate way too little reserve time. So let's look at that, because I think there is a connection to to the medical device industry here. Corporate risk management, there is a standard for that one, and no one in the medical device industry seems to know about this one, because we are so focused on the other one, that is the ISO 14971, and that I don't complain about that, but sometimes I wish we were looking a little bit more on the ISO 31000, which defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and this could be both positive and negative, but in this presentation we are focusing on the negative aspects. So looking at that and saying, what could go wrong in this project? If you have something that says, well, one issue would result in a 17-week delay, we should be mitigating that. We could use avoidance strategies or mitigations where we reduce the likelihood or the consequence of such failures or problems. Either way is fine, but we should work very actively with it. And this leads us to another issue, because we are very focused on thinking about design verification. That's nice. But sometimes we have to do other things, and that is to test with the purpose of reducing project risk. So you need to sometimes do engineering testing where the focus is not to create records for the DHF at the end. No, the purpose is to bring down the likelihood of late-stage failures that you will pay dearly for, and that will cost lots of time. And you can do that. You clearly need to describe then that the purpose of this test is to reduce commercial or business risk. And then you do your design verification later on, which is the more formalized verification that will go into the DHF, that will be under scrutiny from notified bodies or the FDA, and you will be happy to show it to them. But the engineering testing you can play around with in almost any way you like, as long as you keep it outside and clearly define the purpose. Now, if you do that, you can avoid those 17 weeks that I brought up before. And many project managers are neglecting that. And I think in part, it might be due to the focus on product risk management and design verification, which by default tends to happen at the end. And that's where you don't want to experience any big failures. So that was all I was going to say as part of this presentation. I don't think there's anything as interesting and fascinating to work with than this, which is to bring medical devices to market. And I live, eat, breathe that, bringing medical devices to market. And I hope that I've shared some of the engagement that I feel for this topic with you, and that I will see you in the future in some or another way at medicaldevicehq.com. So having said that, I believe we have about 12 or so minutes left. So I hand over to Nick, who's promised to take care of the questions, and I will be happy to answer any interesting questions that you may have. So fire away, Nick.
Thank you so much, Peter. What a great, insightful presentation, and very engaging. We really appreciate it. And just for all the attendees, there we go. We got quite a few questions coming in, but wanted to remind you, got your if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in.
Let's see if we can get some contact with Nick. I was expecting him to come in here.
Oh, am I not?
The Q&A, so maybe I should start on that then instead of waiting for Nick for too long. So let's see here. We have some people agreeing about the signatures, and I'm happy to see that you agreed on that. We have one question here from Daniel on the reviewer ID for document approval. How do you document that those individuals' functions perform that review? How do you document that those individuals' functions perform that review without a signature? I'm not entirely sure what I should say to that question. Let's see here.
Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, we have lots of people commenting on the diminishing value of signatures. I'm happy to see that. We agree on that. And one person, Brian, here brings up the definition of quality for a medical device needs to change to 3 factors: safe, effective, available. So I believe you're getting back to this, that being late, it's simply unethical. It needs to be available as well. So it's our duty to make sure that the product ends up in the marketplace. That's an important remark. How do I account for risk of failing to get approval from FDA and lose 90 days? So that's a good question. When I speak with people about how they should look at the documentation, also there you need to take project risk management or corporate risk management into account. Now, some cases you know that, well, if we cut down on this, we might get a question from the FDA. We can work on having an answer to that question in the meantime while they're processing your application. And when there is that question, we might be able to respond to it. Or you might be in a position where you know that it's super critical that you go through the process without any remarks. And then obviously you might aim higher so that you actually spend some extra time and resources making sure that you get through in the first case. So this is also a project risk-based decision, how much time and energy you want to spend on that, I would say. I know that's not super clear maybe, but that's the best take I have on that. Many times we see it as an absolute, like you have to do everything you can. Well, look at the consequences and say what they are. Like 3 minor non-conformities from a notified body is not end of the world. In fact, that might even be a reasonable goal to have, because if you have no non-conformities, you're probably overdoing things. Hello, Nick. Welcome back.
Hello, Peter. Can you hear me now?
I started with the Q&A here.
Yes, I was aware. I was trying to hop in here, but it's
my management should be happening throughout the life of the product from yes, absolutely. I agree with that. Product risk management, absolutely. Should engineering test results be documented in the QMS or DHF? No, I would say no. Possibly you could have in your procedure and say, we sometimes do engineering tests, and the purpose of those are solely commercial. We do them for project risk management purposes, and they would clearly be labeled as such. And I've seen some test protocol templates having like a big checkbox. Is this for the DHF? Which means you need to have your statistical methods, product acceptance criteria, and everything that comes with it. And then there's one checkbox which says this is an engineering test, will never ever go into the DHF, and then you can immediately take it and say, no, not for the FDA or for the notified body. Yes. Yes, and I saw some comments. I cannot hear Nick. Is that the problem? I'm the only one who cannot hear Nick. That's too bad. Maybe I can fix that. So, oh yes, I had an auto power off on my speaker, or that's the problem. Now I can hear you, I think, Nick. My apologies.
All righty. Well done running through the questions there, Peter. I just want to say, well, I appreciate you diving in and handling that. And as I was saying, just really appreciated the presentation. Very well done. Very engaging. Let's just keep running with the questions here then. Yes.
Would you like to select a few, or should I keep on digging into them?
You can go ahead with the next one, and I'll catch up with where you're at in the list here.
Yes. So one of the questions, how much responsibility should a project manager take on R&D and design decisions? Well, there is a really funny statement, which I think is true to some extent. The more complex the project is, the less you need an engineer to manage it. And there is some truth in that. Because the thing with a project manager is to keep that helicopter perspective on what's going on. It's political discussions, negotiation, it's team building, it's motivation, all those things. And those are maybe, if I may have some prejudice, but I'm an engineer myself, is maybe not the personal traits for most engineers. So maybe it's another type of person you need for that particular part. And another aspect of this, now that we talked about project risk management. So what typically happens many times is that you say, oh, we're going to have reserve time. The first thing that happens is that management cuts it away. And then your schedule shrinks, which means that you go instantly into firefighting mode. So the project manager is running around, putting out fires, not doing any proactive, preventive actions for the project to stay on track. So it's like doomed to fail from day one in many projects. You know you're behind schedule already when you start, and that's unrealistic, and you won't have time to prevent disasters. And no one should be in that position. So yes, that was a long answer to your question, Fabio. But it really depends on the organization. If you're 4 people, and there's only one who could manage the project, and that one happens to be the R&D engineer who's responsible for the design, by all means. I've had many hats on in many different projects, and sometimes that's just the case. Yes.
All righty, thank you. We got a question here from Michael. He asked, is it advisable to have the same individual in charge of managing design control in a project and managing the whole project in general?
Yeah, so that's a good question as well. And I'm sorry for getting a bit cynical, but as you know, people struggle with getting projects right. And one of the things that I've seen is that if you can just write like 3 or 4 sentences, I'm taking this to the extreme, so I hope no one gets offended. But if you can write 3 or 4 sentences, you're an engineer and can write that and it makes sense, people are going to say, oh, she or he is really good at writing. Maybe that person should be a project manager. And I've seen it over and over again. The only one who is the slightest interested in writing in Word instead of CADing or doing electrical schematics becomes a project manager. Is that good? Not necessarily, but it's very common. So should that person be the same? Sometimes it is not necessarily a good idea. My favorite is when you have a really good QA person in the project who guides people, who says, let's not waste time on that thing. It's not important. Let's focus on this thing. This is the way we should do it. This is the most effective way. Let's make sure we get to market as quickly as we can with the right quality. Good enough. That's the perfect QA person.
Very nice. And Pekka asks, do you have experience on nominating a design review meeting as a reviewer approved for a document? Could that work for reducing the number of signatures?
So let me see here. The question was if you could, was it to approve during the design review?
Yeah, do you have experience on nominating a design review meeting as a reviewer?
Okay. No, I have not. But sometimes you sign during the meeting. That could happen, but that's also a little bit dangerous because most people would want to stop the meeting. And if they know that if they have remarks and that means that they're going to have to reconvene, you create the wrong type of incentives. So I normally don't do that. I always focus on having as few approvers as possible to simply speed up the process and know that the ones that are signing actually mean it.
Fantastic. We appreciate that, Peter. It looks like we are all out of questions here for today, so we really appreciate you taking the time to answer those, Peter. Great responses. Why don't you go ahead? Where can people find you at if they have questions or want to reach out to you after this, Peter?
They should definitely go to medicaladvicehq.com. They'll find short courses like 15, 20 minutes recorded videos on risk management, design control, and other topics, not unlike this one. Or they could subscribe to my YouTube channel where I take online course material and publish for free on YouTube. So medicaladvicehq.com or the YouTube channel with the same name.
Absolutely, everybody. Go check it out. Peter puts out great content, great training. As you guys see, there's just tons of comments coming in talking about how great of a presentation this was. Really appreciate your time, Peter. And everybody else, thank you so much for joining the True Quality Virtual Summit. And we hope to see you at the next session coming up here in just a minute.
Thank you so much, everybody. Hope to hear from you soon. And thank you, Nick.
Cheers.